Betrayal. The very word carries a weight that crushes the heart and wounds the soul. It is not the stranger's deception that cuts the deepest, nor the enemy's schemes that shake the foundation of one's spirit. It is the betrayal of those we love, those we trusted with our vulnerabilities, those we believed would walk with us through life's storms. The sting of betrayal is not just in the act itself, but in the realization that the hands that once held yours in comfort have now pushed you into despair. The lips that once spoke words of love have now uttered lies and deceit. And the heart that once beat in harmony with yours now beats in rhythm with treachery. There are few pains in this world that rival the agony of being betrayed by a loved one. The mind becomes a battlefield, replaying memories, searching for signs, questioning if love was ever real. The heart, once open and trusting, hardens under the weight of sorrow. The soul wrestles with a question that echoes through the silence of night. Why? Why would someone you cherished, someone you sacrificed for, turn against you? Why would God, who sees all, allow such heartbreak to unfold? It is in these moments, when tears fall like rain and hope seems distant, that the enemy whispers his most dangerous lie: you are alone. He wants you to believe that no one sees your pain, that no one understands the betrayal you have suffered. He wants to convince you that even God has turned his face away, that your suffering is in vain. But that is where he is wrong. If you have been betrayed, you are in the company of the greatest. Joseph was thrown into a pit by his own brothers, sold like an object, discarded like he was nothing. David, the anointed king, was hunted by the very man he served faithfully. Jesus, the purest love the world has ever known, was betrayed by one of his own disciples with a kiss. Betrayal is not the end of your story. It is the setting for God's divine plan to be revealed. And yet, in the middle of your pain, it is difficult to see the purpose. Your heart cries out for justice, for answers, for some form of restoration that makes sense of the suffering. But God does not always reveal his plans in the moment of our anguish. He does not always provide immediate relief from the wound of betrayal. Instead, he allows the pain to transform us, to sharpen us, to refine us like gold in the fire. There is a purpose in the pain. There is a lesson hidden beneath the sorrow. God does not allow betrayal to enter our lives to destroy us. He allows it to refine us, to teach us, to elevate us. But how do you find strength in such moments? How do you hold on when the very people who should have protected you are the ones who hurt you? The answer is found not in the hands of man, but in the hands of God. You may feel abandoned, but you are not forgotten. You may feel broken, but you are being rebuilt. You may feel betrayed, but you are on the path to something greater. God does not waste pain. He does not allow suffering without purpose. If he has allowed betrayal to enter your life, it is because he is preparing you for something that betrayal itself cannot destroy. The question is, will you trust him? Will you trust him when the people you love turn their backs on you? Will you trust him when the relationships you invested in fall apart? Will you trust him when your heart is so heavy that it feels impossible to move forward? Do not mistake betrayal as the absence of God's love. Rather, see it as the moment when his love becomes your foundation, when his strength carries you through. He is the God who turns evil into good, the God who lifts up those who have been cast down. The betrayal you have suffered is not the end, it is the beginning of a greater chapter, a transformation that only he can bring to pass. God does not leave his children in the hands of those who harm them. He does not sit idly by while the innocent suffer. He is a just God, a righteous God, a God who takes what was meant for harm and turns it into something so powerful that even your enemies will have no choice but to witness your rise. The betrayal you have endured is not in vain. It is the fire through which God will strengthen you. It is the storm that will prove your resilience. It is the darkness before the dawn of your purpose. And perhaps most painfully, betrayal is the final severing of ties that were never meant to last. God will remove from your life what threatens his plan for you. He will allow the false to fall away so that the truth can rise. He will expose deceit so that you will no longer be trapped by illusions. And in doing so, He is setting you free. If you are listening to this, and you are carrying the weight of betrayal, let this be your sign God is not done with you. He is not finished writing your story. Those who have hurt you, those who have abandoned you, will one day see that they did not break you. They only positioned you for the blessing that is coming. Now, let us uncover the shocking truth about betrayal and how to find strength in God's plan. Betrayal is a divine test, not a punishment. When betrayal strikes, the first instinct is to ask, why me? The pain feels personal, almost as if the universe has conspired against you. But what if I told you that your suffering is not a curse, but a test? A divine test, carefully woven into your life by the one who sees beyond the pain you endure now. Throughout the pages of Scripture, God has tested His chosen ones through betrayal. Joseph, the beloved son of Jacob, was betrayed by his own blood, his brothers, the very ones he trusted. Imagine the agony of that moment. He had done nothing but love them, and in return, they sold him into slavery, stripping him of his home, his family, and his dignity. But what seemed like a cruel fate was, in reality, a divine test. Had Joseph not been betrayed, he would never have reached the palace. He would never have risen to power in Egypt. His betrayal was not the end of his story, it was the beginning of his transformation. God allows betrayal to refine you, not to punish you. He sees your heart, your goodness, your kindness, but He also sees the unseen. He sees the people who pretend to love you but plot against you in secret. He sees the ones who smile in your face but poison your name when you're not around. And so, when you are betrayed, do not mistake it for abandonment. God has not turned His back on you. He is watching, testing, strengthening you for what is to come. Consider David, the man after God's own heart. He was faithful, he was anointed, and yet betrayal followed him like a shadow. King Saul, whom David served with loyalty, sought to kill him. His own son Absalom turned against him. Friends whom he once trusted abandoned him in his time of need, but each betrayal only pushed David closer to God, teaching him to rely not on the loyalty of men, but on the unshakable faithfulness of God. Could it be that your betrayal is your preparation? That God is stripping away false relationships so that you may walk into your destiny unburdened? That He is testing your heart to see if you will trust Him, even when the pain feels unbearable? The refining process is not easy. Fire burns and yet it purifies. Betrayal wounds and yet it strengthens. God does not test those He has abandoned. He tests those He is preparing for something greater. If you feel betrayed, rejected, cast aside, know this: God is watching. And just as He turned Joseph's betrayal into a throne, just as He turned David's suffering into a kingdom, He is working in your life too. But the question remains, will you trust Him in the test? Will you stand firm when the ones you love betray you? Or will you let bitterness consume you? God's test is not meant to destroy you, but to reveal what is inside you. Will you rise, or will you let the betrayal break you? Pain is temporary, but God's justice is eternal. Pain. It grips your soul, steals your peace, and leaves you questioning everything you once believed. When betrayal comes from a loved one, the pain is unbearable. It is not just the loss of trust, it is the loss of a part of yourself. But what if I told you that this pain, as deep as it may feel, is temporary? That one day it will pass, but God's justice will remain forever. Look back at the betrayals in Scripture. Joseph, forgotten in prison for years. David, hiding in caves from those who sought his life. Jesus, handed over to his executioners by one of his own disciples. Each of these moments was filled with suffering, but none of them lasted forever. Pain is a season, but God's justice is eternal. When you are betrayed, you may feel like justice will never come, that those who hurt you will continue living as if nothing happened, while you suffer in silence. But remember, God sees everything. He is not blind to your pain. The betrayal you endured was not overlooked in heaven. Every tear you have cried, He has counted. Every wound inflicted upon your heart, He has witnessed, and justice belongs to Him. Think about Job, a man who lost everything, his wealth, his family, his health, all because the enemy sought to break him. But God had a plan. Though Job suffered greatly, he never turned away from God. And in the end, everything he lost was restored, not in equal measure, but in abundance. The same God who restored Job is the same God watching over you. Justice does not always come in the way we expect. Sometimes those who hurt you will experience loss themselves. Sometimes they will be forced to watch as you rise, realizing too late that they threw away someone they should have cherished. But sometimes justice is quieter. It is the peace that God gives you when the pain no longer controls you. It is the healing that allows you to move forward while they remain stuck in their own cycles of misery. The pain you feel now will not last forever, but the lesson it teaches you will. God's justice is not always immediate, but it is inevitable. The hands that hurt you will one day tremble under the weight of their own actions. The ones who betrayed you will one day stand before God, and He will repay according to what is just. Your role is not to seek revenge, but to trust that God's justice is greater than any form of human retaliation. And while you wait for justice, remember this healing is not found in bitterness. It is found in surrender. When you release the pain to God, you allow Him to work on your behalf. You allow Him to heal the wounds, to turn what was meant for harm into something greater. Your pain is not the final chapter of your story. The betrayal you suffered will not define you. What will define you is how you rise from it, how you trust in God even when you do not understand. And when the time is right, you will see justice will come, and it will come in a way that only God could have orchestrated. Your worth is not defined by their actions. Betrayal can make you question everything about yourself. The words they spoke, the way they treated you, the ease with which they discarded you, it all begins to plant seeds of doubt. Was I not good enough? Was I too much? Did I deserve this? And soon the betrayal that wounded you externally begins to seep into your soul, convincing you that you are somehow to blame for their actions. But hear me when I say this: your worth is not defined by their betrayal. Their inability to see your value does not diminish it. The ones who betrayed you did not do so because you were unworthy. They did so because they were unworthy of the love, trust, and loyalty you gave them. Think of Jesus. He healed the sick, fed the hungry, and walked among those whose society had cast aside. He loved without condition, and yet He was betrayed, not because He lacked anything, not because He was flawed, but because the hearts of men were corrupt. Did Judas' betrayal make Jesus any less the Son of God? Did the Pharisees' rejection change His divine nature? No. And just as their actions did not alter who Jesus was, neither do the actions of those who betrayed you alter your worth. In the story of Hagar, she was abandoned by those who once cared for her. Cast out into the wilderness with nothing but a small supply of water, she felt unseen, unworthy, forgotten. But God met her there, and in that moment she named Him El Rai, the God who sees me. You may feel discarded, rejected, abandoned, but you are not invisible to God. He sees you. He knows your pain, and He has not forgotten you. Betrayal often reveals more about the betrayer than the betrayed. People do not always leave because you were lacking. Sometimes they leave because they were never meant to stay. Some people were only in your life for a season, and when that season ends, God allows their removal to make space for something greater. But the enemy will try to use their departure to make you question yourself. He will whisper lies in your ear, convincing you that if you were truly valuable, they wouldn't have left. But let me remind you of something: gold does not lose its worth when someone walks away from it. Diamonds are not any less valuable because someone fails to recognize their brilliance. And you, beloved, are more valuable than both. God does not define you by how others treat you. He defines you by His love. And His love is unwavering, unchanging, and unconditional. He called you fearfully and wonderfully made before the betrayal. He called you chosen, set apart, and worthy before they turned their back on you. Their rejection does not change your identity in Him. If you allow betrayal to dictate your worth, you give power to the very people who hurt you. But if you anchor your worth in God, no betrayal, no rejection, no abandonment will ever shake your foundation. You are not less because they left. You are not broken because they hurt you. You are still whole, still loved, still worthy. Not because they see it, but because God declared it. And His word is the only one that stands. Forgiveness is strength, not weakness. The moment betrayal enters your life, so does the battle between bitterness and forgiveness. The pain is so deep, the wound so raw, that the very thought of forgiving those who hurt you feels impossible. How do you forgive the one who betrayed your trust? How do you release someone who never apologized? How do you move forward when the scars still remind you of what they did? The world tells you that forgiveness is weakness, that to let go is to surrender, to allow them to win. But in truth, forgiveness is not weakness, it is the greatest display of strength. Look at Jesus on the cross, beaten, humiliated, abandoned, nailed to the very wood He created. And yet, as He hung there, suffering at the hands of those He came to save, He spoke words that still shake the heavens. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Jesus did not forgive because they deserved it. He forgave because He refused to let their betrayal define Him. He forgave because His purpose was greater than His pain. And if He, the innocent Lamb of God, could extend forgiveness to those who crucified Him, how much more should we forgive those who have wounded us? But let's be honest, sometimes forgiveness feels impossible. The hurt runs too deep, the memories too painful. And that is why forgiveness is not something we do in our own strength. It is something we surrender to God. Joseph forgave his brothers not because they deserved it, but because he saw the hand of God at work in his betrayal. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. That is the essence of forgiveness, choosing to see God's purpose beyond the pain. But let's be clear, forgiveness is not reconciliation. It does not mean allowing those who hurt you back into your life. It does not mean pretending as if nothing happened. It means releasing the weight of their actions from your soul so that you are no longer bound by their betrayal. When you hold on to unforgiveness, you carry the very poison that was meant to destroy you. Resentment grows like a weed, strangling your peace, consuming your joy. But when you forgive, you reclaim your power. You break free from the chains of bitterness and step into the freedom that God has for you. Forgiveness is not about them, it is about you. It is about your healing, your peace, your ability to move forward. The enemy wants you to stay trapped in anger, replaying the betrayal over and over again. But God calls you higher. He calls you to let go, not for their sake, but for your own. The process of forgiveness is not instant. It is a daily surrender, a continual choice. Some days you will feel like you have released it, only for a memory to resurface and reignite the pain. But each time you take it back to God, you remind yourself that you are not forgiving because they deserve it, but because you refuse to be held hostage by the past. And one day, without even realizing it, the pain will no longer hold power over you. The betrayal will no longer define your story. You will look back and see that what they meant for evil, God has turned into something far greater than you could have imagined. God removes to replace. There is a pain unlike any other, the pain of losing someone you thought would always be there. The ache of watching them walk away, or worse, witnessing their true colors reveal that they were never truly with you. You replay the memories, searching for clues, wondering if there was a moment when everything shifted. Were they always this way, or did something change? Was the love and trust you shared ever real? These questions haunt the heart, making it difficult to let go. But what if I told you that their absence is not a loss, but a divine replacement? That God, in His infinite wisdom, removes people from your life not to harm you, but to make room for something greater. We often hold on to relationships, friendships, and even family connections out of habit, history, or hope. We assume that because someone has been in our life for years, they are meant to stay forever. But not everyone who starts the journey with you is meant to finish it. Some people were only assigned to a season of your life, And when that season ends, their presence becomes a burden rather than a blessing. Look at Abraham and Lot. Lot was family, his own nephew. They had traveled together, built together, faced hardships together. But the time came when their paths had to separate. Why? Because where God was taking Abraham, Lot could not follow. Lot was not bad, but he was not meant for Abraham's next chapter. And so God allowed circumstances to force a separation. Not because Abraham failed, but because Abraham was being prepared for something greater. How many times has God tried to remove someone from your life, but you kept holding on? How many times has He exposed someone's betrayal, their dishonesty, their selfishness, yet you made excuses for them? Sometimes we prolong our suffering by refusing to let go of what God is trying to replace. God is not cruel. He does not remove people to leave you empty. He removes to replace. He subtracts what is harming you to add what will bless you. But the pain of the removal often blinds us to the promise of the replacement. We mourn what we lost instead of preparing for what is coming. Think of the disciples. They walked with Jesus, learned from Him, shared meals with Him. They were His closest companions, and yet among them was one who was not meant to remain Judas. His presence served a purpose, but his heart was never truly with Jesus. And so when his betrayal was revealed, he removed himself. But what happened after? The disciples did not remain incomplete. God replaced Judas with someone who was meant to be part of the mission. If God has removed someone from your life, trust that He has already planned their replacement. Trust that He has seen the future you cannot yet see. If you could see the hidden conversations, the secret motives, the unseen dangers, you would thank God for every person He removed. But trusting God in the removal process is difficult. The heart clings to familiarity. It wants to believe that people can change, that time will heal, that the love you gave them was enough to keep them in your life. And so we fight against God's process. We chase after those who walked away. We hold on to relationships that no longer serve us. We beg for doors to reopen that God Himself has shut. And what does that do? It delays what He wants to bring into our lives. It keeps us bound to something that was never meant to be permanent. God does not take away to hurt you. He takes away to heal you. He closes doors because He has a better one waiting to be opened. But you cannot receive what is new if your hands are still gripping what is old. Sometimes God removes people abruptly. A betrayal forces you to walk away. A lie is exposed. A friendship suddenly falls apart. And you are left confused, wondering why. But rather than seeing it as a loss, what if you saw it as divine protection? What if God allowed the betrayal to free you from someone who would have destroyed you later? The Israelites wanted to return to Egypt. Even after God had delivered them from slavery, even after He had opened the Red Sea for them to cross, they still longed for what was familiar. But Egypt was not their future. It was their past. And no matter how much they missed it, they could not return because God had removed them from it. How many of us are still longing for our own versions of Egypt? How many of us are crying over people who were never meant to stay? How many of us are praying for restoration when God is calling for release? When someone leaves your life, it is not always rejection, it is often redirection. God is not depriving you. He is leading you. But will you trust Him enough to let go? Will you trust Him enough to believe that what He has for you is better than what you are losing? Because here is the truth. The one who betrayed you, the one who abandoned you, the one who walked away, they were never your source. They were never the foundation of your life. God was. And as long as He remains with you, you have lost nothing. Elevation often comes after betrayal. Betrayal feels like a devastating blow, a fall from the heights of trust into the depths of despair. But what if I told you that this fall was not the end? What if the very pain that sought to break you was actually the tool God is using to elevate you? What if the betrayal you suffered was not a defeat, but a doorway? Look through Scripture and you will see a pattern. Before every great elevation, there was a betrayal. Before Joseph became second in command over all of Egypt, he was thrown into a pit by his own brothers. Before David was crowned king, he was betrayed and hunted like an animal. Before Jesus fulfilled his mission, he was handed over by Judas. These were not coincidences. These betrayals were not mistakes. They were necessary steps in the journey toward elevation. God does not allow betrayal to destroy you. He allows it to position you. But in the moment, it does not feel like positioning, it feels like suffering. It feels like injustice. You gave your best to people who turned against you. You were loyal to those who spoke lies behind your back. You loved those who abandoned you. And now, you are left wondering why. But here is the truth: God allows betrayal because some people cannot go where He is taking you. Some people are only part of your past, not your future. And when it is time for God to elevate you, He must first separate you. Betrayal is painful, but separation is necessary. Look at Joseph's life. His brothers despised him not because he had done anything wrong, but because he had a dream, a divine calling on his life. His own family could not handle his destiny, and instead of celebrating him, they tried to destroy him. They threw him into a pit, sold him into slavery, and thought they had erased him. But they did not realize that their betrayal was the very thing that pushed him toward his purpose. Had they never betrayed him, he would have never ended up in Egypt. Had he never gone to Egypt, he would have never met Pharaoh. And had he never met Pharaoh, he would have never been placed in a position to save the very brothers who betrayed him. Let that sink in. The people who betrayed you think they have buried you. They think they have ended your story. But what they do not realize is that God is using their betrayal to plant you, not to bury you. There is a difference. When a seed is buried, it is hidden. It disappears from sight. The world forgets about it. But beneath the soil, something is happening. In the darkness, in the isolation, growth is taking place. Maybe right now you feel buried. You feel forgotten, cast aside, abandoned by those you loved. But remember this: before a seed can break the ground, before it can rise toward the sky, it must first endure the darkness. Betrayal is the darkness before the breakthrough. Think of David, anointed to be king as a young boy, yet his journey to the throne was not immediate. Instead, he spent years running for his life, being hunted by King Saul, the very man he had once served with loyalty. David could have fought back. He could have taken revenge. But he did not. He trusted God's timing and waited for the elevation that only God could bring. And in the end, Saul fell, and David rose not through manipulation, not through revenge, but through divine promotion. Your betrayal is not a sign that God has abandoned you. It is a sign that He is preparing you. He is using the pain, the rejection, the loss to strip away what no longer serves you so that He can bring you into what He has destined for you. But here is where many people fail. They do not see betrayal as part of God's process, so they allow it to destroy them instead of developing them. They become bitter instead of better. They become stuck in their pain instead of stepping into their purpose. Joseph could have spent his life angry at his brothers. David could have let Saul's betrayal harden his heart. But instead they trusted that God was in control. And because of that, they were not just restored, they were elevated. Look at Jesus. His greatest betrayal came from someone within His own circle, Judas. A man who walked with Him, sat at His table, shared in His ministry. But without Judas, the cross would have never happened. And without the cross, there would have been no resurrection. Judas thought he was ending Jesus' mission, but in reality he was only playing his part in fulfilling it. What if the people who betrayed you were not sent to destroy you, but to push you toward your purpose? What if their rejection was actually your redirection? The enemy wants you to believe that betrayal is a setback, but God says it is a setup for something greater, something beyond what you can see right now. But here is the key: you must let go of what was in order to step into what will be. You cannot move forward while still clinging to those who betrayed you. You cannot step into your elevation while still trying to hold on to people God has removed. Joseph did not go back to the pit to argue with his brothers. He moved forward. David did not chase after Saul, begging him to be his ally again. He moved forward. Jesus did not try to stop Judas. He moved forward. And that is what God is calling you to do. If you have been betrayed, do not see it as the end of your story, see it as the beginning of your next chapter. Because if there is one thing we know about God, it is this: He never allows betrayal without a greater purpose on the other side. God sees everything. There is a pain unlike any other, the pain of knowing you were wronged and watching those who hurt you continue their lives as if nothing happened. The betrayal was deep, the wounds were real, and yet it seems as if the world does not care. They move on, unbothered, while you are left carrying the weight of what they did. It feels unfair. It feels cruel. And in the silence of your suffering, a question begins to form in your heart: does God even see what happened to me? The answer is yes. God sees everything. Not just the betrayal itself, but every silent tear you cried when no one was looking. Every night you lay awake replaying the moment they turned against you. Every time you had to pretend you were okay when, deep down, you were breaking. He saw it all. And not only did he see it, he took note of it. Many times the reason we struggle with betrayal is not just because of the pain itself, but because it seems like there is no justice. We want an apology, a reckoning, an acknowledgement that what was done to us was wrong. We want them to feel the weight of their actions, but often we do not get that closure. Instead, they continue as if nothing happened, leaving us wondering if justice will ever come. But justice does not come from man, it comes from God. Look at the story of Cain and Abel. Cain thought he could kill his brother and hide the crime, but God saw everything. When Cain tried to deny what he had done, God responded with chilling words: "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Genesis 4:10. If the blood of Abel could cry out to God, do you not think that your pain cries out to him as well? Every act of betrayal, every false word spoken against you, every injustice done to you, God has recorded it all. It may seem like the betrayers are winning. It may seem like they are moving forward, living their lives without consequences. But do not be deceived, God is not mocked. Galatians 6:7, whatever a person sows, they will reap. It is a spiritual law, unbreakable, unshakable, undeniable. No one escapes it. Look at Haman in the book of Esther. He plotted against Mordecai, schemed to destroy him, and built gallows to see him executed. And for a time it looked like he was succeeding. He was elevated in power, respected by the king, living as if his wickedness had no consequence. But just when he thought he had won, the tables turned. He was hanged on the very gallows he built for Mordecai. Betrayers always build their own downfall. They may think they have succeeded, but they are merely setting themselves up for God's justice. Think of Joseph's brothers. They threw him into a pit, sold him into slavery, and erased him from their lives. For years they lived as though their sin did not matter. But when famine struck, they were forced to stand before the very brother they betrayed, and suddenly the weight of their actions came crashing down. God had not forgotten. And God has not forgotten you. Maybe the pain of betrayal has made you feel invisible. Maybe you feel like no one sees your suffering, no one understands what you have endured. But let me remind you, God is El Roi, the God who sees. Genesis 16:13. He saw Hagar in the wilderness when she thought she had been abandoned. He saw Job when his friends turned against him. He saw David when Saul hunted him like an animal, and he sees you now. Nothing is hidden from him. Not the lies they told, not the wounds they inflicted, not the way they laughed at your pain. Every injustice has been recorded in the courts of heaven, and in his perfect timing God will repay. But here is the challenge: you must resist the urge to seek revenge yourself. That is where many fall. In their pain, they want to take justice into their own hands. They want to prove a point, expose the betrayer, or make them feel what they felt. But revenge is a heavy burden, and it only poisons the soul. God says, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay." Romans 12:19. That is not a suggestion, that is a promise. When you try to handle betrayal on your own, you limit what God can do. But when you step back and let Him take control, He does more than you could ever imagine. He does not just bring justice, He restores. He does not just repay, He elevates. Look at Job. He lost everything, suffered betrayal from his own friends. Yet because he trusted God, he was restored double for everything he lost. Job 42:10. That is the kind of justice God brings. Not just punishment for the betrayers, but restoration for the betrayed. He does not just remove what was taken, He gives back more than you ever imagined. So if you are in the middle of your betrayal, feeling unseen, unheard, forgotten, remember this: God sees everything. And if He sees it, He will deal with it. If He allowed it, He will use it. If He has not acted yet, it is because His timing is perfect. Your betrayers may seem to be winning now, but their story is not finished, and neither is yours. Betrayal is a wound that cuts deep, a storm that shakes the very foundation of your trust. It leaves you questioning everything you're worth, your relationships, even your faith. But as painful as it is, betrayal is not the end of your story. In fact, in the hands of God, it becomes the very thing that leads to your transformation. Think back to every moment of suffering we have spoken about: Joseph in the pit, David running from Saul, Jesus betrayed by Judas. Each of these moments seemed like a defeat, a cruel twist of fate that threatened to destroy everything they had built. But in every case, God was working behind the scenes, turning what was meant for harm into something greater than anyone could have imagined. The betrayal you suffered was not for nothing. God saw it, He recorded it, and He is using it to shape your destiny. You may not see it yet. The pain may still feel fresh, the wounds still raw. But trust this: God never allows pain without purpose. If they betrayed you, it is because they were not meant to go where God is taking you. If they turned against you, it is because God is revealing who truly belongs in your life. If you were hurt, it is because God is refining you, strengthening you, preparing you for something greater. Yes, it is hard to let go. Yes, it is painful to move forward without the ones you thought would always be there. But when God removes, He replaces. When He allows loss, He brings restoration. When He permits suffering, He provides healing. And when the time is right, you will look back at this season not with anger, not with regret, but with gratitude. Because you will see that what they meant to destroy you, God used to build you. What they tried to bury, God used to elevate. What they thought was your end, God turned into a new beginning. So do not fear what was lost. Do not chase after those who walked away. Do not waste your energy trying to prove your worth to those who failed to see it. Instead, trust in the one who never betrays, who never forsakes, who never abandons. Trust in God's plan. Your story is not over. Your best days are not behind you. The pain they caused will become the lesson they learn. And as for you, you will rise not in bitterness, not in revenge, but in the power of God's justice, God's restoration, and God's unfailing love. They thought they broke you, but God is about to prove them wrong.